For centuries, humanity was seen as weak and insignificant. A young species clinging to a volatile planet, orbiting an average star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. Short-lived, emotion-driven, excessively individualistic. According to Council assessments, humans lacked the patience, unity, and foresight required to matter on a galactic scale. They were ignored by the galaxy, dismissed by those in power, studied only as a curiosity, something to observe, not to fear. The Galactic Council measured influence in centuries and empires in millennia. Time was their greatest weapon. They had watched countless species rise, fracture, and fade away simply by waiting. No invasions required. No fleets deployed. History, they believed, always favored the old and the patient. Humanity would be no different. When humans petitioned for greater representation, the requests were delayed. When they protested trade restrictions and territorial encroachment, the issues were sent to committees designed never to reach conclusions. When human colonies struggled under economic pressure, the Council assured itself that natural correction was underway. Time would solve the problem. Humanity would adapt, or disappear. What the Council never understood was that humans experience time differently. Where ancient species saw decades as moments, humans saw them as lifetimes. Every delay was felt. Every dismissal remembered. Every closed door quietly noted. While the Council debated outcomes across centuries, humans measured consequences in years, and acted accordingly. They learned quickly. They learned that help would not come. That fairness was conditional. That survival was their responsibility alone. So humanity stopped asking. They withdrew from galactic discourse not in anger, but in calculation. Trade slowed. Diplomatic channels went quiet. Council observers marked this as stagnation, even decline. Models predicted internal collapse within a few generations. The Council was satisfied. Time, after all, was still on their side. What those models failed to account for was how humans used the time they were given. Every delay became preparation. Every sanction became motivation. Every ignored warning became a lesson etched into collective memory. Humanity did not rage against the galaxy. They studied it. They mapped its habits, its arrogance, its assumptions. They learned how power behaved when it believed itself unchallenged. And then they waited. Quietly. Efficiently. Purposefully. By the time the Council noticed anomalies, unexplained technological leaps, human systems growing strangely opaque, timelines no longer aligning with predictions, it was already too late. Time was no longer neutral. Humanity had turned it into a weapon. The Council had believed weakness meant harmlessness. That patience belonged only to the old. That progress followed predictable curves. They would soon learn the truth no simulation had warned them about. Humanity didn't need centuries. They only needed the moment everyone else stopped paying attention. The Galactic Council tightened its grip without ever admitting it had done so. There were no fleets dispatched to human space. No ultimatums delivered. That would have required acknowledging humanity as a threat, or even as an equal. Instead, the Council acted through procedure, regulation, and delay. The most effective weapons of an ancient power. Trade was cut first. Shipping lanes that had served human colonies for decades were abruptly reclassified. Fees increased. Permits expired and were never renewed. Cargo vessels bound for human systems found themselves held in endless inspections or redirected entirely. Essential resources, medical compounds, advanced alloys, precision components, became scarce almost overnight. The Council called it market correction. Humanity called it strangulation. When human representatives protested, they discovered their access had quietly changed. Speaking time in council sessions was reduced. Voting rights were suspended pending compliance reviews. Appeals disappeared into administrative voids, acknowledged but never resolved. Rights were revoked one clause at a time. Human explorers lost access to shared navigation data. Human research institutions were barred from collaborative networks. Even migration rights were curtailed, trapping millions in systems that were no longer economically viable. Isolation was not announced. It was engineered. Humanity was pushed outward, away from galactic infrastructure, away from shared markets, away from influence. Neighboring powers were encouraged, subtly, deniably, to expand into contested regions. Human protests were logged and archived. Human warnings were dismissed as emotional overreaction. The Council expected collapse. Their projections were clear. Humans relied too heavily on external supply chains. Their political structures were fragmented. Their cultures were noisy, argumentative, and inefficient. Cut off from the galactic economy, they would turn inward and tear themselves apart. Some council members spoke of it openly. A regrettable outcome, they said. An inevitable one. A lesson for other young species. Humanity endured the pressure in silence. Not because they were unaware, but because they were watching. They noted which species voted against them, and which abstained. They tracked which corporations profited from the embargoes. They studied how quickly the galaxy accepted their marginalization. And they adapted. Civilian production was repurposed. Black market innovation became sanctioned necessity. Colonies once specialized for export were restructured for self-sufficiency. Every loss forced a redesign. Every closed door encouraged a workaround. Human signals to the wider galaxy began to fade, not through destruction, but intention. Beacons were shut down. Data traffic narrowed. Entire systems reduced their external emissions to background noise. Council observers interpreted the silence as decay. They adjusted timelines again. Humanity, they concluded, was entering its final phase. What the Council never considered was that isolation was not a sentence. It was an opportunity. Freed from oversight, freed from imposed standards, freed from expectations, humanity began operating on its own clock. Decisions that once took years were made in weeks. Projects once deemed too risky were pursued without hesitation. The Council waited patiently. They had all the time in the universe. Humanity was learning how to use it better. Isolation didn't break humanity. It did what no ideology, no war, and no shared enemy ever fully accomplished. It unified them. At first, the fractures remained. Old rivalries lingered out of habit. Governments argued out of reflex. Colonies still clung to identities forged by distance and history. Humanity had always been divided, by borders, beliefs, and the illusion that someone else would intervene before things truly fell apart. Isolation erased that illusion. When trade ceased and supply lines failed, it became immediately clear that no single world could endure alone. Medical shortages in one system meant nothing without manufacturing in another. Energy-rich colonies were powerless without food producers. Knowledge, once fragmented across competing networks, had to be shared or lost entirely. Survival demanded cooperation. Human leaders convened emergency summits not for diplomacy, but necessity. Longtime rivals shared tables without ceremony. Old accusations were dropped, not forgiven, simply rendered irrelevant. Borders blurred when resources flowed freely across them. Militaries stopped posturing and began coordinating logistics. Arguments ended when extinction entered the room. The first Joint Command was provisional, formed to manage shortages and stabilize colonies. The second integrated defense and infrastructure. By the third, humanity no longer pretended this was temporary. Every colony voted. For the first time in recorded human history, the result was unanimous. All planetary defense forces, industrial capacity, and off-world infrastructure would answer to a single authority. No flag was raised. No anthem played. There was no leader crowned and no victory declared. This was not conquest. It was consolidation. The unified human command was created quietly, born not of ambition, but of clarity. Humanity understood something the Council never had. Survival did not care about pride. Colonies that once competed now specialized. Production chains were rebuilt for redundancy, not efficiency. Research was shared without restriction. Scientists stopped protecting discoveries and started weaponizing solutions. Unity accelerated everything. Technologies once stalled by regulation advanced rapidly. Shipyards expanded beneath asteroid crusts and hollowed moons. Civilian infrastructure was redesigned to withstand isolation indefinitely. Human children grew up learning one simple truth, that no one beyond their species would save them. Culture followed. Art shifted from celebration to resolve. Stories stopped dreaming of belonging and started teaching endurance. History was rewritten, not to glorify the past, but to ensure it was never repeated. Humanity did not become gentler. They became focused. As unity deepened, external signals vanished entirely. Navigation beacons were shut down. Long-range broadcasts ceased. Even passive emissions were reduced until human space became indistinguishable from empty stars. To the Council, humanity had gone quiet. To itself, humanity had become whole. Defense doctrine evolved rapidly. Humanity stopped preparing for war and began preparing for being alone. Every system assumed worst-case scenarios: total isolation, overwhelming enemy force, loss of entire sectors without warning. Victory was no longer the objective. Continuity was. If one world fell, others would endure. If fleets were destroyed, more would rise. Humanity designed itself so that no single failure could end them. And beneath it all lay a single, shared understanding. If no one else would protect them, they would protect themselves. By the time the Council archived humanity as a species in terminal decline, unity was complete. What they believed was fragmentation was, in truth, preparation. Time was still passing, but it was no longer passing in the Council's favor. Human engineers began by abandoning thin silence. Humanity evolved. No announcements marked the change. No demonstrations were broadcast across the stars. Progress unfolded far from trade lanes and observation posts, hidden beneath asteroid fields, within hollowed moons, and deep inside systems long dismissed as economically irrelevant. Omni-layer constraints. The engines that once powered human ships were designed for efficiency, cost, and compliance with Council standards. Those standards no longer mattered. New propulsion systems emerged, drives that did not merely push against space, but manipulated it. Test vessels vanished from one orbit and appeared in another without crossing the distance between. Travel became arrival. Energy production followed. Reactors were redesigned not for peak output, but permanence. Systems were sealed, layered, and redundant beyond excess. Where older designs accepted failure as inevitable, new human doctrine rejected it outright. Nothing vital could rely on a single point of weakness. Then came shields. Council defensive technology relied on dispersion and overload thresholds, principles refined over millennia. Human shields ignored those principles entirely. They adapted in real time, reshaping themselves to incoming energy profiles. Impacts were absorbed, redistributed, and rendered meaningless without visible flare or stress. Tests against archived Council weapon data produced the same result. No penetration. No degradation. No learning curve for the attacker. Fleets were constructed around these advances, but not as instruments of conquest. Human vessels were dense, angular, and utilitarian, designed to function in isolation for decades. Every ship was self-sufficient. Every fleet capable of fragmentation without losing cohesion. There were no symbolic flagships. There was no center to destroy. Command structures were distributed, hardened against decapitation. Human fleets did not rely on singular leaders or centralized control. Authority flowed where it was needed, vanished where it was not. Humanity studied the galaxy carefully during this time. They analyzed how empires expanded, how they fractured, and how they died. They noted that power often failed not from lack of strength, but from rigidity. From systems that could not adapt when reality diverged from expectation. Human doctrine was built to bend. Weapons research progressed quietly. Some projects were compartmentalized so deeply that even human worlds knew only fragments of their existence. Entire systems were designated for testing, places the galaxy had long ignored, where no one would notice the sudden distortion of gravity or the brief dimming of stars. Humanity did not pursue destruction for its own sake. They pursued certainty. Communications evolved as well. Broad-spectrum transmissions were abandoned. Human signals became narrow, precise, and nearly impossible to intercept without foreknowledge. Humanity did not hide through stealth alone, they hid through discipline. While the galaxy expanded, argued, and postured, humanity refined. While the Council debated influence and borders, human fleets drilled in silence, rehearsing scenarios that assumed everything would go wrong. Total isolation. Overwhelming force. No allies. No warning. Survival was the metric. By the time anomalies began appearing at the edge of Council awareness, unmapped gravitational disturbances, empty systems behaving incorrectly, navigation data that refused to stabilize, humanity was ready. The Council believed it had sidelined a weak species. In truth, it had given humanity the one resource it underestimated: time. And humanity used it without wasting a single moment. Then a new enemy appeared. They did not emerge from the fringe or announce themselves through ritualized first contact. One cycle, a border system failed to report. The next, an entire sector went silent. Trade lanes collapsed. Navigation data returned voids where inhabited worlds had once existed. The survivors called them the Dominion. Not because that was their name, but because domination was the only constant in their advance. Worlds fell with terrifying speed. Dominion fleets arrived in overwhelming numbers, their formations dense and merciless. Planetary shields that had endured wars for centuries failed in moments. Orbital defenses were neutralized before they could fire a second volley. Communications died first, surgically removed, ensuring no warnings traveled ahead of the invasion. Entire civilizations were overrun before the Council could convene a session. Species were enslaved. Populations were catalogued, stripped of culture and autonomy, and pressed into labor networks that spanned conquered systems. Some were relocated to industrial worlds under permanent occupation. Others were never seen again, their disappearance noted only in casualty estimates that grew too large to process emotionally. Resistance proved futile. Council fleets engaged where they could, confident in doctrines refined over millennia. They lost. Every time. Dominion forces adapted at a pace that rendered experience meaningless. Tactics that worked once failed immediately after. Countermeasures were anticipated before they were deployed. Every battle made the Dominion stronger. The Council responded as it always had. With debate. Emergency chambers filled with representatives arguing over definitions while star maps updated in real time, red zones spreading across sectors like an infection. Committees were formed to assess responsibility. Votes were delayed over cost-sharing and jurisdiction. Fleets were promised, then redirected, then withdrawn as political calculus shifted. Entire systems burned while the Council argued procedure. Some member species fortified their borders and quietly withdrew support, choosing survival over unity. Others demanded concessions before committing forces. The ancient alliance fractured under the weight of its own self-interest. Panic set in when a founding Council world fell. Not a peripheral colony. Not a junior member. A core system. The final transmission was calm. Too calm. Cities remained intact. Infrastructure undamaged. The planet had not been destroyed. It had been claimed. The illusion of safety vanished. Ancient defense clauses were invoked. Emergency powers declared. Fleets were mobilized at last. Too scattered, too constrained, and too late. Losses mounted rapidly as Dominion forces pressed inward, their advance accelerating as resistance weakened. Desperation forced the unthinkable. Someone reopened the archived files. Humanity. Status. Isolated. Projected outcome. Collapse. But the data no longer aligned. Old sensor logs were re-examined. Unexplained fleet losses near former human space. Gravitational anomalies without source. Entire systems behaving in ways Council physics could not explain. A theory emerged, quietly at first. Humanity had not collapsed. They had withdrawn. Reconnaissance probes were dispatched toward abandoned human territory. Most never returned. Those that did sent back fragmented data, distorted readings, masked energy signatures, and the unmistakable outline of vast, organized infrastructure. Human fleets. Not massed for conquest, but layered in depth. Defensive networks spanned entire systems, integrated so tightly they appeared as single structures. No borders were marked, yet nothing crossed without being noticed. Humanity had not gone extinct. They had prepared. The Council did not celebrate. They argued. Some demanded immediate alliance. Others insisted on formal apologies and restitution. A few suggested coercion. Humanity had once been weak, after all. Surely pressure could be applied. The irony went unspoken. When the Dominion breached yet another sector, this one dangerously close to the Council's core, the arguments ended. A single transmission was authorized, carefully worded, stripped of arrogance, though traces remained. The Council requested assistance. And for the first time in its history, it waited for an answer from the species it had once dismissed. From the silence it had imposed. From humanity. The Council expected forgiveness. They prepared statements filled with carefully measured regret, admissions of miscalculation, acknowledgments of shared responsibility, apologies engineered to preserve authority while appearing humble. Diplomatic envoys rehearsed language meant to remind humanity of its former place within the galactic order. They expected gratitude. They found resolve. The response did not arrive through sanctioned council channels. It did not follow diplomatic protocol or request recognition. Instead, it appeared simultaneously across every council system, overriding encryption and bypassing linguistic filters with effortless precision. A single transmission. The image showed a human seated in a plane chamber. No insignia. No banners. No indication of rank. The message carried no visual spectacle, no attempt to intimidate. When the human spoke, the voice was calm. "We acknowledge your request." The chamber stilled. "We are aware of the Dominion. We have observed your losses. We understand the urgency of your situation." A pause followed, not for effect, but deliberation. For generations, you determined when humanity was worth hearing. When our concerns merited response. When our survival mattered. The words were spoken without bitterness. That era has ended. The Council demanded clarification. Invoked mutual defense precedents. Cited ancient accords humanity had once been denied participation in. The human listened. Then answered with finality. "We will decide when to act." No threats followed. No timelines. No reassurance. The transmission ended. In the aftermath, the Council waited, exposed and powerless. Dominion forces continued their advance, burning systems the Council no longer had the strength to defend. Each loss sharpened the realization that control had already slipped away. Then the universe began to misbehave. Gravitational sensors across multiple sectors registered fluctuations that violated established constants. Trade lanes warped. Navigation solutions contradicted themselves. Stars dimmed fractionally, as though space itself were being displaced. Energy readings spiked in synchronized patterns, immense, controlled, and unmistakably artificial. Human systems long believed dormant began to change. Structures unfolded from concealment fields, spanning thousands of kilometers. Fleets shifted positions without observable acceleration, appearing where nothing had existed moments before. Defensive networks activated in cascading layers, locking into configurations no council model could interpret. Humanity was not mobilizing. They were executing. The Council finally understood what it meant when humanity said they would decide. Time was no longer a buffer. It was a countdown. And whatever humanity had chosen to do, the galaxy was about to experience it. Human fleets emerged in perfect silence. There was no warning, no hyperspace rupture, no detectable transition signature. One moment, the void between stars was empty. The next, it was filled with human vessels arranged in formations so precise that council sensors struggled to render them correctly. Massive hulls locked into geometric alignment, each ship positioned with mathematical certainty. There were no visible weapons charging, no shields flaring. The fleets did not advance. They simply existed. Dominion forces detected them seconds later. Targeting arrays snapped to life. Weapon systems charged. Tactical AIs screamed conflicting assessments as threat models failed to converge. Before a single shot was fired, a message crossed every channel. Not transmitted. Not broadcast. Inserted. It bypassed encryption, ignored language barriers, and resolved itself into meaning within every receiving mind. Stand down. There was no threat attached. No ultimatum. No countdown. The Dominion answered with fire. Planet-cracking beams tore through space toward the human fleets. Missiles saturated predicted movement vectors. Kinetic barrages filled the void with destruction. They struck nothing. Human ships were already elsewhere, repositioned without observable acceleration, as if distance itself had ceased to apply. Dominion fire passed harmlessly through empty space, targeting solutions rendered obsolete before weapon cycles could complete. Then humanity responded. There was no barrage, no explosion, no spectacle. Entire Dominion formations lost power simultaneously. Engines shut down. Weapons went dark. Command links collapsed in perfect unison. Ships drifted, intact and helpless, their crews alive but blind and isolated. Where resistance persisted, space folded. Localized gravitational distortions crushed weapon systems inward, disabling them without breaching hulls. Dominion vessels found themselves trapped in regions where momentum behaved unpredictably, where escape vectors simply failed. The engagement did not escalate. It concluded. Across multiple sectors, Dominion forces were neutralized in minutes. Not destroyed, not routed, not humiliated. Contained. Council observers watched in stunned silence as real-time feeds updated faster than comprehension allowed. Battles that should have taken years ended before emergency resolutions could be drafted. Dominion Command attempted retreat. There was nowhere to go. Human fleets anticipated every vector, every contingency, every desperate maneuver. Reinforcements vanished en route, intercepted before they could join the fight. Escape routes collapsed into navigational impossibilities. The Dominion had prepared for war. Humanity had prepared for inevitability. The final transmission came from a human command node, calm, precise, and absolute. Hostilities are concluded. The Dominion did not surrender. They were finished. By the time sound returned to the council chamber, voices rising in disbelief, fear, and awe, the war was already over. Human fleets remained in position, silent and immovable. The galaxy understood, at last, what humanity had become. Not conquerors. Not saviors. Something far more dangerous. A species that had learned how to end a war before it truly began. The Council tried to reclaim control. Emergency powers were reaffirmed. New charters were drafted. Authority was loudly reasserted in chambers that echoed with voices desperate to sound confident again. Committees were formed to determine jurisdiction over liberated systems, to catalog the remnants of the Dominion, to decide who would govern what had been saved. It was too late. Human fleets did not withdraw when the fighting ended. They did not occupy worlds or claim territory. They positioned themselves instead at critical junctions, along fractured borders, near destabilized systems, and beside worlds the Council had failed to protect. They did not command. They observed. Council envoys requested coordination. Humanity responded politely, briefly, and without deference. There were no concessions to negotiate, no influence to trade, no authority to recognize. Humanity listened, evaluated, and acted according to its own assessments. The Council was no longer the center of galactic power. It was a participant. Liberated species waited for demands that never came. No tribute was requested. No allegiance required. Human ships repaired infrastructure, restored communications, and departed without ceremony. Some species offered loyalty. Humanity declined. Others asked for protection. Humanity made no promises. Instead, they demonstrated something far more unsettling: presence. Human patrols became a constant feature of regions once abandoned to chaos. Trade routes stabilized, not through policy or enforcement, but through certainty. Piracy vanished. Expansionist powers reconsidered their ambitions. The galaxy adjusted its behavior not because humanity ordered it to, but because it had seen the alternative. The Council issued statements celebrating unity and cooperation, carefully framing humanity's actions as a collective victory of galactic governance. Humanity did not correct them. They did not seek credit. Across human space, fleets remained on alert. Engines stayed warm. Sensors stayed active. Humanity did not celebrate the end of the war. There were no monuments, no holidays, no declarations of triumph. Preparation continued. Humanity had learned something the galaxy was only beginning to understand. Darkness did not arrive with warnings or declarations. It crept. It adapted. It returned. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They had no interest in crowns, councils, or empires built on arrogance and delay. They had simply proven a truth the stars would never forget. If darkness rises again, humanity will be there.